There is a peculiar thing that happens to consciousness when it believes it has woken up. It celebrates. It congratulates itself. It says, "Ah, now I see clearly. Now I understand." And in that very moment of self-congratulation, it falls back asleep, but this time with the added conviction that it is awake. This is perhaps the most dangerous trap of all, because a person who knows they are sleeping might at any moment wake up, but a person convinced they are already awake has no reason to open their eyes. You see, we are living in a civilization that has mistaken a very elaborate dream for reality. We have constructed entire systems of thought, vast institutions, towering edifices of belief, all predicated on a fundamental misunderstanding of what we are and what this universe actually is. And the truly ingenious aspect of this trap is that it doesn't feel like a trap at all. It feels like common sense. It feels like the way things obviously are. It feels so natural that to question it seems absurd, even dangerous. Consider for a moment the story you have been told about yourself. You are, supposedly, a separate individual consciousness locked inside a bag of skin, a ghost in a machine made of meat and bone, piloting this body through a world that is fundamentally alien to you, fundamentally other than you. You arrived here, naked and screaming, some number of years ago, and you have been trying ever since to make sense of this strange place, to carve out some small territory of safety and meaning before the inevitable darkness closes in. You are a stranger in a strange land, and you must constantly be on guard, must constantly be working, striving, achieving, protecting, because the universe is indifferent to your suffering, and death is always waiting just beyond the next heartbeat. This is the story. This is the narrative that most people in our culture absorb before they even learn to speak. And it is, in the most profound sense, a fiction, not because there is no truth in it at all, but because it is a radically incomplete picture masquerading as the whole truth. It is a map that has been mistaken for the territory, and when you navigate your life based on this map, you end up lost in the most existential sense possible. You end up alienated from the very ground of your own being. The trap begins with language. From the moment we learn to speak, we learn to divide the world into separate things. There is me, and there is everything that is not me. There is inside and outside, self and other, subject and object. Language is a knife that cuts the seamless fabric of reality into discrete pieces, and while this is extraordinarily useful for certain purposes, for building civilizations, for communicating, for all the practical matters of survival, it creates a pervasive illusion. We begin to believe that these divisions in language correspond to actual divisions in reality. We forget that the menu is not the meal, that the word water will not quench your thirst, that the concept of fire has never burned anyone. But it goes deeper than this. Not only do we divide the world into separate things, we divide ourselves. We create this entity called the ego, the I, and we believe this to be our true self. We identify with our thoughts, our memories, our social roles, our body, our emotions, and we say, "This is me. This is who I am." And then we spend our entire lives defending this fictional character, trying to improve it, trying to make it successful, trying to make it happy, trying to make it immortal, all while something in us knows, dimly, distantly, that this is all a game we are playing with ourselves. The ego is not a thing. It is a process, a verb masquerading as a noun. It is something you are doing, not something you are. It is a chronic habit of thought, a pattern of muscular tension, a way of organizing experience around an imaginary center. And yet we treat it as the most solid, most undeniable thing in our existence. We would defend it with our lives. And in fact, we do defend it with our lives, moment by moment, sacrificing the vast aliveness of the present moment for the sake of maintaining this narrow, constricted sense of self. This is where the sleeping happens. Not in some dramatic moment of losing consciousness, but in this subtle, ongoing contraction away from what is actually happening. We are so busy being someone, being this separate self with its endless needs and fears and desires, that we completely miss the direct, immediate, undeniable fact of existence itself. We are so lost in thought, in mental narrative, in the constant commentary of the internal monologue, that we barely notice we are alive. We barely notice the extraordinary, ordinary miracle of consciousness, of sensation, of this inexplicable appearance of a world. And the culture reinforces this sleep at every turn. From childhood, we are trained to be productive, to be useful, to fit into the social machinery. We are taught to postpone gratification, to work now for happiness later, to sacrifice the present for some imagined future. We are given roles to play: student, employee, parent, consumer, and we are rewarded for playing these roles convincingly. The entire system is designed to keep us functional, to keep us producing and consuming, to keep us too busy, too distracted, too anxious to ever stop and ask the dangerous question: what if none of this is necessary? What if I am not who I think I am? The economic system depends on your dissatisfaction. It requires you to feel incomplete, inadequate, not quite good enough, because only a dissatisfied person will keep buying, keep consuming, keep working themselves to death to afford the next thing that promises to finally fill the void. Advertising is a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to the proposition that you are not enough as you are, that you need something external to complete you. And we are so marinated in these messages that we don't even see them anymore. They have become the background hum of existence, the water we swim in without ever noticing we are wet. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of the trap is that it convinces you that waking up is dangerous. It tells you that if you let go of the ego, if you stop maintaining this constant vigilance, if you relax the death grip on control, something terrible will happen. You will be taken advantage of. You will lose everything. You will dissolve into nothing. The ego is convinced that it is the only thing standing between you and annihilation, and so it fights for its survival with every weapon at its disposal: anxiety, guilt, shame, fear, desire, all the endless strategies of psychological warfare that keep you locked in the prison of yourself. And yet, in the quiet moments, in the gaps between thoughts, something else is always there. Something vast and open and utterly simple. Something that has never been asleep and can never truly wake up because it was never born and can never die. This is your original nature, your true face before your parents were born, the awareness that is reading these words right now. It is not something you need to achieve or attain. It is not something that requires years of discipline or special experiences or altered states. It is simply what you are when you stop pretending to be something else. The Zen masters have a saying: before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The point is that awakening is not about transcending ordinary life or escaping into some mystical realm. It is about seeing through the illusion of separation, about recognizing that the one who is chopping wood, and the wood being chopped, and the chopping itself are not three separate things, but one undivided activity of the universe. It is about coming home to what has always been here, to the suchness of things as they are, without the overlay of conceptual interpretation. But you cannot think your way to this realization. The thinking mind, the conceptual mind, is precisely the mechanism that creates the illusion of separation in the first place. You cannot use the prison to escape from the prison. You cannot use the ego to transcend the ego. This is why spiritual seeking so often becomes another trap, another game the ego plays with itself. The seeker is the sought. The one who wants to wake up is the dream character trying to realize it is a dream. As long as there is someone trying to get somewhere, trying to achieve something, trying to become enlightened, the game continues. And yet, and this is the beautiful paradox, the very fact that you are reading these words, that you are questioning, that you feel some dissatisfaction with the conventional narrative, means that something in you already knows. The impulse to wake up does not come from the ego. It comes from that deeper dimension of your being that has never been fooled, that has been waiting patiently for you to tire of the game, to exhaust yourself with seeking, to finally give up and fall into what has always been here. The trap keeps most people asleep because it is so comfortable, so familiar. It is the devil we know. We would rather stay in our familiar suffering than risk the unknown. We would rather cling to our precious sense of being a separate self, no matter how painful, than let go into the groundless ground of being. We are like someone having a nightmare who refuses to wake up because they are attached to the storyline, no matter how terrifying it becomes. We would rather be someone unhappy than risk being no one at all. What makes this trap so effective is that it operates on multiple levels simultaneously. It is not just a philosophical error or a conceptual mistake. It is embodied in your very musculature, in the chronic tension you carry without even knowing it, in the way you hold your breath, in the way you brace yourself against experience. The sense of being a separate self is not just an idea you believe. It is something you are constantly doing with your entire organism, a full-body resistance to the flow of life. Watch yourself when you are anxious or afraid. Notice how you contract, how you become smaller, how you pull away from the present moment. The body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, the mind races into the future or retreats into the past. This is the mechanism of the trap in action. You are trying to protect something that doesn't actually exist, this imaginary entity called me, from threats that are largely imaginary as well. And in this protective maneuver, you cut yourself off from the only thing that is actually real, the living, breathing, pulsing immediacy of now. The ancient traditions understood this. They recognized that the human being is constantly in a state of what might be called existential cramp. We are tensed up against reality, fighting what is, trying to make experience conform to our desires and expectations. The whole project of meditation, of contemplative practice, is really about learning to let go of this chronic tension, to stop fighting with life, to allow things to be as they are without the constant interference of the controlling mind. But here again, the trap is subtle, because the ego can take meditation itself and turn it into another project, another thing to achieve, another way to feel special or superior or more spiritual than others. You can spend years meditating and never actually let go. You can accumulate experiences, states of consciousness, profound realizations, all while the one who is accumulating these things remains firmly in place, unchanged, still operating from the same fundamental sense of separation. The trap has simply moved to a more refined level. This is why the real spiritual teachers, the ones who actually see through the game, are often so frustrating to the seeking mind. They don't give you what you want. They don't provide techniques or methods or practices that will make you feel like you're making progress. Instead, they pull the rug out from under your feet. They take away all your supports, all your concepts, all your ideas about spirituality, until you are left with nothing to hold on to. And then they ask you to look at who is feeling lost. They know that as long as you have something to hold on to, some method or technique or belief system, the ego will use it to maintain itself. The only way through is to let go completely, to fall into the abyss, to discover that the abyss has no bottom because you are the abyss. Now this might sound terrifying to the ego, and it is. The ego is absolutely convinced that letting go means death, annihilation, the end of everything. And in a sense, it is right. What dies in awakening is the illusion of separation, the belief that you are a separate entity over and against the universe. But what discovers itself in this dying is that you were never that entity to begin with. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, temporarily and playfully pretending to be a separate person. You are the whole dance pretending to be a single dancer. This is not a belief or a philosophy or a metaphysical proposition. It is a direct, immediate recognition that completely reorganizes your relationship to experience. When you see through the illusion of separation, everything changes and nothing changes. The world goes on exactly as before. Birds still sing, rain still falls, bills still need to be paid. But the one who is experiencing all of this is revealed to be not a separate observer, but the very activity of experiencing itself. There is no one standing apart from life, watching it happen. There is only life happening, with no one doing it, and no one to whom it is happening. But let us return to the trap, because understanding how it works is the first step in seeing through it. The trap is maintained by a constant activity of mind that we might call psychological time. This is the habit of living anywhere except the present moment. We are either lost in memories of the past or fantasies about the future, and the present moment, the only moment that actually exists, is reduced to a thin sliver between past and future, something to get through on the way to something better. This psychological time is the medium in which the ego exists. The ego is a story, a narrative about a person who was born, who has had certain experiences, who has certain characteristics and qualities, and who is heading towards some imagined future. Strip away this narrative, remove the past and future, and what is left? What is here when you are not telling yourself the story of who you are? This is not a theoretical question. It is an invitation to look directly, to investigate your actual experience in this moment, without the filter of memory and anticipation. The strange thing is, when you actually look, you cannot find the one who is looking. You cannot locate yourself as an object in consciousness. You can find thoughts, sensations, perceptions, emotions, all sorts of content arising and passing in awareness. But the one who is supposedly experiencing all of this remains curiously absent. The subject cannot be made into an object. The eye cannot see itself. The knife cannot cut itself. And yet, undeniably, consciousness is happening. Experience is occurring. So what are you really? This is where the trap starts to loosen its grip, because you are beginning to investigate the actual mechanics of your experience rather than simply believing the story you have been told. You are starting to question the most fundamental assumption, the assumption of a separate self, and this questioning is itself the beginning of awakening. Not awakening as some special state or mystical experience, but simply as seeing what is actually true, as opposed to what you have been taught to believe. The culture does not want you to ask these questions. It needs you to remain convinced that you are a separate consumer, a separate worker, a separate citizen. It needs you to believe that you lack something, that you are incomplete, that you need to acquire more, achieve more, become more. A person who sees through this game, who recognizes the fullness and completeness of existence exactly as it is useless to the economy. They cannot be manipulated by advertising, cannot be motivated by status anxiety, cannot be controlled by fear. They are free in a way that is deeply threatening to the systems that depend on your enslavement. And make no mistake, it is enslavement, though of a peculiar kind. You are enslaved not by external chains, but by your own belief in limitation, in separation, in the need to protect and promote this fictional character called me. You are the prisoner and the prison guard simultaneously. You have locked yourself in a cell and thrown away the key, and then you pace back and forth wondering why you feel so trapped. The door was never locked. The prison was always imaginary. But you cannot see this while you are still believing in the reality of the prisoner. This is what makes the trap so perfect, so complete. It doesn't need external enforcement. It is self-maintaining, self-perpetuating. Every time you think, I need to wake up, you are reinforcing the existence of the one who needs to wake up. Every time you seek enlightenment, you are strengthening the seeker. The trap is made of the very material you are trying to escape from: thought, identification, the sense of being a separate self. You cannot escape it by going anywhere or doing anything. You can only see through it by recognizing that it was never real in the first place. There is a story from the Zen tradition about a fish who asks, "What is this water I keep hearing about?" The other fish are puzzled by the question. Water? What water? This is just the way things are. The fish lives in water its entire life, surrounded by it, sustained by it. But because it has never been outside of water, it cannot recognize water as something distinct. It is too close, too fundamental, too omnipresent to be seen. We are like this fish. We are so immersed in the illusion of separation, so completely identified with the separate self, that we cannot see it as an illusion. It is simply the way things are, the obvious truth of experience. Of course I am a separate individual. Of course I am this body and mind. Of course there is me and everything else. It is so self-evident that it doesn't even require examination. And yet, this self-evident truth is the very thing that needs to be questioned, the very thing that keeps us asleep. The trap works by making itself invisible. It operates below the threshold of conscious awareness, in the realm of assumption and conditioning. You did not choose to believe you are a separate self. It was not a decision you made after careful consideration. It is something that happened to you, something that was programmed into you from the earliest age, before you had any capacity to question it. By the time you developed the ability to think critically, the sense of being a separate self was already so deeply ingrained that questioning it felt like questioning the existence of the ground beneath your feet. And perhaps the most insidious aspect of this programming is that it makes its own questioning seem dangerous or crazy. To question the reality of the separate self is to risk being labeled mentally ill, delusional, unstable. Our entire diagnostic framework for mental health is predicated on the assumption that a healthy person has a strong, stable sense of individual identity. Someone who claims to have no self, who says that the distinction between self and other is illusory, is likely to be diagnosed with depersonalization disorder or some form of psychosis. The culture will pathologize awakening if it does not recognize it as such. This is not to say that all experiences of ego dissolution are enlightenment. Clearly, there are pathological states of dissociation that are genuinely problematic. But the inability of our culture to distinguish between pathological dissociation and genuine spiritual realization reveals just how deeply committed we are to the separate self as the foundation of sanity. We have made the prison into the definition of mental health. We have made the trap into the standard of normality. Consider how much of your daily life is spent maintaining this separate self. How much energy goes into worrying about what others think of you, into comparing yourself to others, into trying to prove your worth, into protecting your self-image. How much mental bandwidth is consumed by rehearsing conversations, replaying past interactions, planning future scenarios in which you come out looking good? How much of your emotional life is dominated by the endless cycling of pride and shame, superiority and inferiority, success and failure, all the dualities that only make sense if there is a separate self that can be evaluated and judged? And what do you get for all this effort? Even when you succeed, even when you get what you want, even when you achieve your goals and receive recognition and approval, there is a hollowness to it. The satisfaction is temporary, superficial. It does not touch the deeper unease, the existential anxiety that lurks beneath all your striving. You might distract yourself from it for a while, might numb yourself with pleasure or entertainment or work, but it always returns. The sense that something is wrong, that something is missing, that you are not quite whole. This is the fundamental dis-ease of the separate self, and no amount of external success or achievement can cure it, because it is built into the very structure of separation. The trap promises that if you just work hard enough, if you just achieve enough, if you just acquire enough knowledge or wealth or power or love, you will finally feel complete. But this is a lie. The separate self, by its very nature, can never feel complete because it is defined by lack, by the sense of being cut off from the source. It is like a wave that believes it is separate from the ocean, frantically trying to find water. The water is everywhere. It is what the wave is made of. But as long as the wave maintains the illusion of being separate, it will continue to feel empty and insufficient. This is what the mystics mean when they talk about the fundamental unity of existence. They are not proposing some vague, feel-good notion that we're all one. They are pointing to the actual concrete reality that the sense of being a separate self is a misperception, a case of mistaken identity. You are not a fragment of existence trying to connect with other fragments. You are the entire field of existence, temporarily and playfully manifesting as this particular point of view, this particular configuration of consciousness. But, and this is crucial, this recognition does not mean that you suddenly lose all sense of individuality, or that the distinctions between things disappear. The world does not turn into some undifferentiated blob. Rather, what happens is that the anxious, contracted, defensive quality of the separate self dissolves, and what remains is a relaxed, open awareness that includes both the sense of being this particular person and the recognition that this person is not separate from the whole. It is like the wave recognizing it is the ocean, while still being a wave, still having its particular shape and movement and character. This is not a merger or a fusion. It is not that you become one with everything in some mystical union. It is simpler and stranger than that. It is the recognition that there are not two things to be unified. There is only this immediacy, this presence, this inexplicable appearance of a world. And you are not something separate from this. You are not the audience watching the show. You are the show itself, the entire performance, temporarily forgetting its nature and believing itself to be just one of the characters. Now, the mind immediately wants to make this into a concept, a belief system, a new identity. I am the universe, I am everything. And this becomes just another trap, another way the ego reinforces itself, this time with spiritual concepts. The real recognition is not a thought or an idea. It is a shift in the felt sense of being, a relaxation of the chronic contraction that creates the illusion of separation. And this shift cannot be grasped or held onto or made permanent by an act of will, because the one who would do the grasping is precisely what is being seen through. This is why awakening is often described as a kind of death. Not the death of the body, but the death of the illusion, the death of the pretense, the death of the one who was trying so hard to maintain control and make sense of everything and get somewhere. What dies is the resistance to what is. What dies is the chronic tension of trying to be someone. And what is discovered in this dying is that you never were that someone to begin with. You were always just this: consciousness, awareness, the presence that witnesses the appearance and disappearance of all experience without itself appearing or disappearing. But the trap has one final defense mechanism. When you get close to seeing through it, when the edifice of the separate self starts to crumble, fear arises. Tremendous, overwhelming fear. Because from the perspective of the ego, this is annihilation. This is the end. And the ego will do anything to survive. It will create new layers of seeking, new spiritual identities, new ways to maintain the game. It will turn awakening itself into another goal, another achievement, another feather in the cap of the separate self. This fear that arises at the edge of awakening is worth examining more closely, because it reveals something essential about the nature of the trap. The fear is not actually about physical death or harm. It is something more primordial, more existential. It is the fear of groundlessness, of losing all reference points, of discovering that there is no solid foundation beneath you, and there never was. It is the fear that Nietzsche pointed to when he spoke of the death of God, not the death of a bearded man in the sky, but the death of all absolute certainties, all fixed meanings, all the conceptual structures we use to make sense of existence. The separate self lives in a world of meaning that it has constructed. It has stories about who it is, what it values, where it is going. It has goals and purposes and significance. It matters, or at least it desperately wants to matter. And the prospect of seeing through this, of recognizing that all meaning is constructed, that there is no inherent purpose or significance to anything, that you are just a temporary arising of consciousness in an infinite play that has no author and no audience. This is terrifying to the ego. It would rather cling to suffering, to anxiety, to the constant strain of maintaining itself than face this apparent abyss. But here is what is not usually understood. The abyss is not what you fear. The abyss is what you are. The groundlessness is your true nature. The absence of fixed meaning is not a problem to be solved, but the very freedom you have been seeking. When you stop trying to find solid ground and simply allow yourself to fall, you discover that you cannot fall because there is no distance between where you are and where you could fall to. You are already here, already complete, already whole. The search for meaning was itself the problem, the very thing that created the sense of meaninglessness. This is one of those paradoxes that the rational mind cannot resolve. The mind wants a meaning for existence, a reason for being, a justification for the whole mysterious appearance of consciousness and cosmos. But meaning is always relative. Something means something in relation to something else. A word has meaning because it points to something beyond itself. A tool has meaning because it serves a purpose. But existence as a whole cannot mean anything because there is nothing outside of it to which it could point or in relation to which it could have purpose. Existence simply is. It requires no justification, no explanation, no meaning beyond itself. And when you really understand this, when you feel it in your bones, it is not depressing or nihilistic. It is incredibly liberating, because you realize that you are free. Free from the need to justify your existence, free from the need to make something of yourself, free from the tyranny of purpose and significance. You can simply be, simply exist, simply participate in this grand display without needing it to mean anything, or go anywhere, or achieve anything. The play is playing itself for no reason whatsoever, and you are the play. This is what Zen means when it says nothing to attain. There is nowhere to get to, nothing to achieve, no enlightenment to reach, because you already are what you are seeking. The very search is the only thing keeping you from recognizing what is already here. It is like looking everywhere for your glasses while they are on your face. The more frantically you search, the more you confirm that they are lost. But when you finally stop searching, when you relax and give up, you notice that you have been seeing through them all along. The trap keeps you searching. It keeps you seeking. It keeps you in the future, in the realm of not yet, in the perpetual postponement of fulfillment. It tells you that awakening is something rare and special, something that happens to other people, something that requires years of discipline and special circumstances, and perhaps multiple lifetimes of practice. And all of this is true, from the perspective of the trap. From the perspective of the ego, awakening is impossibly difficult, because awakening is the end of the ego. The ego cannot awaken because the ego is the sleep. But from another perspective, from the perspective of what you really are, awakening is not difficult at all. It is not an achievement. It is a recognition of what has always been true. You are already the awareness in which all experience appears. You are already the consciousness that illuminates all phenomena. You are already the space in which the drama of me and my life is unfolding. This has never not been true. You have never actually been the separate self you believe yourself to be. You have been playing that role, identifying with it, taking it seriously, but you have never actually been it. Consider an actor who becomes so absorbed in their role that they forget they are acting. They believe they really are the character. They suffer the character's suffering, fear the character's fears, desire the character's desires. And then someone reminds them, hey, you're acting. This is a play. You can step out of character anytime you want. In that moment, does the actor need to do something to become themselves again? Do they need years of practice or special techniques? No, they simply need to recognize what they have temporarily forgotten. They simply need to remember what is actually true. This is the awakening that is possible for you right now, in this moment, as you read these words. Not an awakening that happens to the separate self, making it more spiritual, or more evolved, or more enlightened, but an awakening from the separate self, a recognition that the separate self was always a role you were playing, a mask you were wearing, a character you were identified with, but that you never actually were. And the beautiful thing about this recognition is that it does not require you to become different, or better, or more pure, or more disciplined. It does not require you to fix your character flaws, or overcome your limitations, or achieve some special state. All of that is still the game of the ego, still the trap operating at a more refined level. What is required is much simpler and much more difficult. You must stop. Stop seeking. Stop striving. Stop trying to become something other than what you are. Stop for one moment the endless activity of maintaining the separate self, and look. Just look. Not at some object or experience, but at the very nature of consciousness itself, at the one who is looking, at the awareness that is always already here, prior to all experience. What you will find, what you cannot help but find, is nothing. Not the nothing of absence or emptiness in the ordinary sense, but the nothing that is the ground of everything, the fertile void from which all experience arises and into which it returns. This nothing is not empty. It is full, infinitely full, containing all possible experience while being none of them. This is your true nature, and it has been here all along, hiding in plain sight, closer than your own breath, more intimate than thought. But the trap is clever. Even this recognition can be turned into another experience, another achievement, another thing the ego claims for itself. I had an awakening. I saw my true nature. I am enlightened. And now you have a new identity, a new story, a new set of attachments. The trap has simply moved to a more subtle level. This is why the Zen masters insist that if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Any concept of awakening, any image of enlightenment, any idea of what the awakened state should look or feel like, all of this is just more furniture in the prison cell. True freedom is not knowing that you are free. It is not having experiences of freedom or understanding the concept of freedom or believing that you are free. It is simply being what you are, without the overlay of concepts and judgments and narratives. It is living from your true nature without needing to name it or claim it or defend it. It is functioning in the world as a particular person while knowing, in some deep and wordless way, that the person is not what you fundamentally are. Now we come to perhaps the most subtle and pervasive aspect of the trap, the way it co-opts the language and concepts of spirituality itself. The trap has learned to dress itself in mystical garb, to speak in the vocabulary of awakening while keeping you firmly asleep. This is why bookstores are filled with spiritual teachings, why there are countless gurus and teachers and methods and practices, and yet most people who engage with all of this remain trapped. They have simply exchanged one set of chains for another, one form of sleep for a more comfortable, more spiritually decorated form of sleep. The spiritual marketplace operates on the same principles as any other marketplace. It identifies a need, in this case, the vague sense of dissatisfaction and incompleteness that pervades human life, and it offers products and services that promise to fulfill that need. Meditation courses, yoga retreats, mindfulness apps, enlightenment intensives, shamanic journeys, energy healings. The options are endless. And many of these offerings have genuine value. They can reduce stress, increase well-being, provide community, offer moments of peace and clarity. But very few of them actually address the root of the problem, because addressing the root of the problem would put them out of business. The root of the problem is the separate self, and the separate self is what keeps the spiritual marketplace alive. The seeker is the customer. The one who feels incomplete is the one who will buy the next book, attend the next workshop, try the next practice. If the seeker truly awakens, truly sees through the illusion of separation, they cease to be a consumer of spiritual products. They no longer need anything because they recognize they are already what they were seeking. And so there is a strange collusion in the spiritual world, an unspoken agreement to keep the game going, to keep the seeker seeking, to offer just enough insight and experience to keep people interested, but not so much that they actually wake up. This is not necessarily a conspiracy. Most teachers and practitioners are sincere. They genuinely want to help, but they are often caught in the same trap they are trying to help others escape from. They have had glimpses, experiences, realizations, but the separate self has claimed these experiences and built a new identity around them. I am a spiritual teacher. I am enlightened. I have something to offer. And now the trap is operating at an even more subtle level, using spiritual experiences and insights to reinforce the very sense of separation that spirituality is supposed to transcend. You see this pattern everywhere in spiritual communities. The hierarchies, the guru worship, the subtle competition about who is more awakened, who has had deeper experiences, who has studied with more prestigious teachers. The whole structure mimics the secular world it claims to transcend. There are spiritual celebrities, spiritual markets, spiritual status games, and all of it is predicated on the unexamined assumption that awakening is something some people have and other people don't, something rare and special that requires great effort or grace or special transmission. But what if awakening is not rare at all? What if it is the most ordinary, most available thing, constantly present, always here, but simply overlooked because we are looking for something extraordinary? What if the very search for awakening is what keeps it hidden, like searching for silence by making noise? This is the great joke of the spiritual path. The one who is seeking enlightenment is the only obstacle to enlightenment. The path itself is the problem. The practice itself is what keeps you practicing. This does not mean that practices are useless or harmful. Meditation, contemplation, inquiry, all of these can be valuable tools for seeing through the trap, but they become traps themselves when they are treated as methods for achieving something, for getting somewhere, for becoming someone. The moment you are practicing in order to attain awakening, you have reinforced the duality between the awakened and the unawakened, between who you are now and who you hope to become. And this duality is precisely the illusion you are trying to see through. The way out is not to stop practicing, but to understand what practice really is. Practice is not a means to an end. It is not something you do in order to get somewhere else. It is simply a way of being present with what is, of paying attention to the actual nature of experience, of investigating the reality of the separate self that seems so obvious and undeniable. When you sit in meditation, you are not trying to achieve a special state or become enlightened. You are simply sitting, simply being aware, simply observing the arising and passing of thoughts and sensations without getting lost in them. And in this simple observation, something becomes apparent that was always there but never noticed. What becomes apparent is the gap, the space between thoughts, the silence that contains all sounds, the awareness that is aware of awareness itself. This is not something you create through practice. It is something you notice, something that reveals itself when you stop trying so hard, when you relax the chronic effort of maintaining the separate self. And once you notice it, once you catch even the briefest glimpse of it, everything begins to shift. Not because you have achieved something, but because you have seen through something. The seeing through is the key. This is not about acquiring new knowledge or having special experiences. It is about recognizing what is false, what is illusory, what is mere appearance. It is about questioning the unquestioned assumptions, investigating the obvious truths, doubting the certainties that everyone takes for granted. And chief among these certainties is the belief in the separate self, the conviction that you are this isolated consciousness trapped inside a body, fundamentally alone and disconnected from everything else. When you really investigate this belief, when you look for the separate self in your direct experience, you cannot find it. You can find thoughts about yourself. You can find sensations in the body. You can find emotions and memories and perceptions. But where is the self that supposedly owns all of these? Where is the central command center, the ghost in the machine, the little man inside your head pulling the levers? The more carefully you look, the more obvious it becomes that there is no such thing. There is experience happening, but there is no separate experiencer. There is life occurring, but there is no separate liver of life. There is only the occurring itself, the happening itself, the presence of what is. This recognition is so simple that it is almost impossible to believe. The mind keeps insisting that there must be more to it, that awakening must be more dramatic, more special, more different from ordinary experience. But this insistence is itself the trap, the last defense of the ego, the final attempt to maintain control. Because if awakening is not special, if it is not an achievement, if it is simply recognizing what has always been true, then the ego has nothing to claim, nothing to be proud of, nothing to distinguish itself with. And this is exactly the point. Awakening is the end of specialness, the end of being someone important or evolved or enlightened. It is the recognition that you are nothing special at all, which is to say, you are the same as everything else, not separate from the birds and trees and stars, not other than the awareness that pervades all existence. You are just this, just consciousness happening, just the universe experiencing itself through this particular focal point of awareness. And there is nothing to be proud of in that, because there is no separate you to be proud. This is why humility is such a clear sign of genuine realization. Not the false humility that is secretly proud of being humble, but the natural, effortless humility that comes from recognizing that there is no separate self to be either humble or proud. The awakened person, if we can even use such a term, does not go around claiming to be awakened. They do not need to prove anything or convince anyone or maintain any image. They simply function, simply respond to life as it arises, without the constant self-reference that characterizes the unawakened state. Let us now consider the relationship between awakening and daily life, because this is where many people become confused. There is a persistent belief that spiritual realization requires withdrawal from the world, that you must renounce ordinary life, become a monk or a hermit, spend your days in meditation caves or monasteries. And while such paths are valid for some, they are not necessary for awakening. In fact, they can become yet another form of the trap, another way of seeking something other than what is here, another escape from the immediacy of ordinary existence. The trap loves to convince you that awakening happens somewhere else, under different circumstances, when conditions are just right. It tells you that you need to be calmer, more peaceful, more pure, more disciplined. It tells you that if only you had more time to meditate, if only you lived in a quieter place, if only you had fewer responsibilities, then you could finally wake up. And so you spend your life waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, and that moment never comes because you are always looking past what is actually here. But what if awakening has nothing to do with circumstances? What if it is equally available in the noise of the city as in the silence of the monastery? What if it is as present in the midst of difficulty and chaos as in moments of peace and clarity? This is not just a nice idea. It is pointing to something fundamental about the nature of awakening. It is not a state of consciousness, not a particular kind of experience, not a feeling of peace or bliss or transcendence. It is the recognition of what consciousness is, regardless of what states or experiences are arising in it. Consider your own experience right now, whatever it happens to be. Perhaps you are comfortable, perhaps uncomfortable. Perhaps your mind is calm, perhaps restless. Perhaps you are happy, perhaps not. Whatever the content of your experience, there is something more fundamental than the content, the fact that you are aware of it. You are conscious of whatever is arising. And this consciousness, this awareness, this presence, call it what you will, is not affected by what appears in it. It is like the screen on which a movie plays. The screen does not become sad when a sad scene appears, does not become violent when a violent scene appears. It remains what it is, unchanged, undisturbed, simply allowing everything to appear and disappear. This is your true nature, not the changing content of experience, the thoughts, emotions, sensations that come and go, but the awareness itself, the consciousness that illuminates all experience. And this awareness is not separate from you. You are not something that has awareness. You are awareness itself, appearing as this particular person, this particular point of view, this particular stream of experience. When you recognize this, when you shift from identifying with the content to recognizing yourself as the awareness in which content appears, everything changes and nothing changes. The content of your life continues as before. You still have preferences, still make choices, still experience pleasure and pain. But there is a fundamental relaxation, a release of the chronic tension that comes from believing you are a separate self that needs to protect and promote itself. You realize that you cannot actually be harmed because you are not what you thought you were. Your true nature, awareness itself, is untouchable, unborn, undying, beyond all the drama and trauma of personal existence. This might sound like detachment or disengagement, but it is actually the opposite. When you are not constantly defending and maintaining a separate self, you become more present, more responsive, more alive. the energy that was tied up in self-concern becomes available for everything else. You can actually see other people, actually hear what they are saying, actually respond to situations as they are, rather than through the filter of, how does this affect me? Life becomes simpler, more direct, more intimate, because the screen of separation has dissolved. But again, the trap is subtle. The ego can take this teaching and turn it into a new form of spiritual bypassing. I am awareness, therefore nothing matters. I am not this person, therefore I don't need to deal with my problems or take responsibility for my actions. This is a misunderstanding of the teaching. Yes, you are awareness, but awareness is appearing as this person, with this life, these circumstances, these responsibilities. The recognition of your true nature does not absolve you from living skillfully and compassionately. If anything, it makes such living more natural, more effortless, because it is no longer coming from the cramped place of self-concern, but from a deeper intelligence that includes the well-being of the whole. This is what is meant by chopping wood and carrying water. After awakening, you still have to live your life. You still have to pay bills, maintain relationships, take care of your body. But the quality of this living is transformed. It is no longer a burden, no longer a problem to be solved. It is simply what is happening, and there is a kind of ease and grace to it that was not there before. You are still playing your role in the great play of existence, but you are no longer fooled by the role. You know it for what it is, a temporary appearance, a passing wave in the ocean of consciousness. And here we come to another aspect of the trap that needs to be addressed. The belief that awakening will solve all your problems, that once you realize your true nature, life will become easy and pleasant and free from difficulty. This is fantasy. Awakening does not exempt you from the human condition. You will still get sick, still age, still face loss and death. You will still make mistakes, still have blind spots, still sometimes act unskillfully. What changes is not the content of life, but your relationship to it. You are no longer resisting what is, no longer demanding that life be other than it is. And in this acceptance, there is a profound peace that is independent of circumstances. This peace is not the peace of comfort or the absence of challenge. It is the peace of coming home to what you are, of no longer being at war with existence, of recognizing that everything, including your difficulties and failures and fears, is an expression of the one consciousness that you are. Nothing is excluded. Nothing is wrong. Even the trap itself, even the illusion of separation, even the suffering of the separate self, all of it is the play of consciousness, the dance of the universe with itself. Does this mean you become passive, that you stop trying to change things or improve conditions? Not at all. But your actions come from a different place. Instead of acting from the anxious, contracted place of self-concern, you act from wisdom and compassion. You respond to what is needed in each situation without the constant reference to, "What about me?" And paradoxically, this makes you more effective, not less. When you are not in your own way, when the separate self is not constantly interfering, there is a natural intelligence that expresses itself through you, an appropriateness to your actions that comes from being aligned with what is, rather than fighting against it. This is what the Taoists call Wu Wei, action through non-action, or more accurately, action that is not coming from the ego's agenda, but from a deeper attunement to the way things are. It is like a skilled craftsman who has practiced for so long that the practice has become effortless, natural, spontaneous. The hands know what to do without the conscious mind needing to direct them. In the same way, when you are not operating from the separate self, your life becomes a kind of spontaneous expression of intelligence, responding to each moment without the burden of self-consciousness. And so we arrive at the question that has been lurking beneath everything that has been said. What is to be done? How does one escape the trap? Or more accurately, how does one see through it? The frustrating answer, frustrating to the seeking mind, is that there is nothing to be done. Or rather, the doing itself is the problem. Every technique, every practice, every effort to become awakened is still operating within the framework of the separate self, trying to improve itself. achieve something, get somewhere. And as long as this structure is in place, the trap remains intact, merely shifting its form. But this does not mean you should do nothing. It means you should understand what you are doing and why. If you practice meditation, practice it not to achieve awakening, but to investigate the nature of consciousness, to observe the mechanisms of the trap in action. If you study teachings, study them not to accumulate knowledge, but to question your assumptions, to undermine the certainties that keep you asleep. If you inquire into your own nature, inquire not to find an answer, but to see through the one who is asking the question. This is the razor's edge. On one side is the trap of seeking, of making awakening into a goal, of treating it as something to be achieved in the future. On the other side is the trap of passive waiting, of doing nothing because there is nothing to do, of using non-duality as an excuse for avoiding the actual work of self-inquiry. The middle way, which is not really a middle way, but something altogether different, is to engage fully with the investigation, while knowing that the investigation itself will never produce the result you are seeking. The seeking must exhaust itself. The seeker must see the futility of seeking, and this cannot be forced or hurried. It happens in its own time, when the conditions are right, when you have finally worn yourself out, trying to become something other than what you are. For some, this exhaustion comes through suffering. The separate self beats its head against the wall of existence until it can no longer continue, until it collapses in defeat, and in that collapse, awakening happens. For others, it comes through grace, through a sudden, inexplicable opening that has no apparent cause. For still others, it is gradual, a slow erosion of the sense of separation, until one day you realize that you no longer believe in the reality of the separate self, that somewhere along the way, it simply dissolved without your noticing. There is no formula, no guaranteed path. Every path is a trap if you are treating it as a path to somewhere, and every path is valid if you are simply walking it for its own sake, present with each step. This is the great koan of spiritual life. You must seek wholeheartedly, and you must give up seeking. You must make great effort, and you must stop trying. You must take the path seriously, and you must recognize that there is no path. These are not contradictions to be resolved intellectually, but paradoxes to be lived, to be held simultaneously in your awareness until the mind that seeks resolution gives up and something deeper reveals itself. What is that something deeper? It is what you are before thought, before language, before the story of being a separate self. It is the presence that has been here all along, reading these words, looking through your eyes, breathing your breath. It is not hidden or far away. It is closer than close, more intimate than intimacy itself. It is the ground of your being, the source from which you arise each moment, the space in which all experience appears and disappears. And yet, it is utterly simple, utterly ordinary, nothing special at all. It is just this, just presence, just awareness, just the plain, obvious, undeniable fact of being. The trap has kept you looking everywhere but here, looking for something extraordinary, when all along what you are seeking is what you are. You cannot find it by searching, because the searcher is made of the same illusion as what is being sought. But you cannot not find it either, because you are it. You are already what you are looking for. You have always been what you are looking for. There has never been a time when you were separate from your true nature, when you were asleep, when you needed to wake up. All of that is just more story, more mental construction, more activity of the trap. And yet, paradoxically, the realization of this is awakening. Not awakening as an event or an achievement, but as the simple recognition of what is always already true. You have never been asleep except in the dream of being asleep. You have never been trapped except in the belief in being trapped. The prison has always been imaginary. The separate self has always been a mirage. And in the moment, this is clearly seen, not believed or understood or grasped intellectually, but directly perceived. The trap dissolves. Not because you have escaped from it, but because you have recognized that it was never real in the first place. This recognition does not make you special or superior or more evolved than anyone else. It does not give you magical powers or special insights or any of the things the spiritual ego dreams of. What it does is free you from the burden of having to be someone, free you from the endless project of self-improvement, free you from the tyranny of past and future. And in that freedom, life becomes what it has always been, but you were too distracted to notice. A miracle, a mystery, an inexplicable appearing of consciousness and cosmos that requires no justification, no purpose, no meaning beyond its own existence. You are that consciousness. You are that mystery. You have never been anything else. The trap was believing you were something less than this, something separate and isolated and insufficient. But you are not insufficient. You are the totality masquerading as a part. You are the ocean pretending to be a wave. You are awareness itself, playing the game of being a person, and you have been playing it so convincingly that you have forgotten it is a game. But now, perhaps, you are beginning to remember. Not because you have read these words or understood these concepts, but because something in you has always known, has been waiting patiently for the game to end, for the seeking to stop, for you to finally give up and come home. That something is what you are, what you have always been, what you will always be, regardless of whether you recognize it or not. It is the awareness reading these words right now, the presence that illuminates this moment, the consciousness that is the only reality in a world of appearances. The trap keeps most people asleep because it is so comfortable, so familiar, so well designed. But it is also fragile. One clear seeing, one moment of genuine inquiry, one honest look at the nature of consciousness can begin to crack it open. And once the cracking has begun, it is only a matter of time before the whole structure collapses, revealing what was always here, what could never be lost, what you have always been. You are not trapped. You have never been trapped. You have only believed you were trapped, and that belief is the trap. See through the belief, and you are free. Stop maintaining the separate self, and you are what remains. Let go of everything you think you know, and you are what knows. This is the dangerous trap that keeps most people asleep. The belief that they need to wake up, that they are not already awake, that there is something to achieve or attain or become. But you are already the awakeness. You are already the freedom. You are already home, and you have never left. The journey is over before it begins. The seeking ends in the recognition that the seeker never existed. And what remains is this: simple, obvious, undeniable, eternal presence. The consciousness that you are and have always been, playing the temporary game of being human, for no reason at all except the sheer joy of being.